appropriate, Admiral Lyons would agree, I'm sure. I think this is clearing for action, that we are now going to move rather directly to the next part of the program. Recognize our recipients of this year's Freedom Plan. Before you, I neglected to mention one other individual that I would like to recognize, both in connection with our 25 years of the organization and in connection with the Sarascape and Carthage Foundations. And that is our friend Roger Robbins. And we worked with him when Michael was talking about people in the Reagan administration who helped bring down the Soviet Union. I think there's no question that Roger was one of those who played an outsized role as the International Economics Director on the National Security Council staff, and the contribution that was made by that NSC under President Reagan's leadership to execute that first and then execute a strategy that in his inimitable way Giver famously described as "we win, they lose." But Roger was one of those at the right place at the right time, and I'm sorry he's not able to be in this room with us tonight. I know he feels the same way in a sense with regards to all, but I just want to say as a member of the Sarascape board and a dear friend of Dick's and great admirer, of course, of his and esteemed colleague of ours. We're thinking of him tonight as well. Let me segue to the matter at hand. As I say, I feel a lot of emotion tonight, not simply because of the anniversary we're celebrating and the opportunity to do it with dear friends. But this is, of course, D-Day. And I mentioned Miles Prentice earlier. Miles has just returned with his wife Katie from a tour of the battlefields of D-Day. And one of the things I love about Miles is that for a big, old Army officer, who, by the way, in 1963, I believe it was, 64, was commissioned on this day. It's always touching to see him get a little choked up when he expresses the emotion that he feels seeing those lines of white crosses and looking at those beaches from Pointe du Hoc cliffs, and comes back and talks about the generation that served so valiantly and lost in such large numbers to protect the kinds of freedoms that Dick gave, and of course Allen West, and all of you in this room hold as dearly as we do. It happens this is the anniversary of yet another extraordinary individual's entrance into the service of this country. 60 years ago, I'm told, Admiral Ace Lyons graduated from the Naval Academy. And 61 years. And the wonderful thing about Ace is that the tender age of 84, 5, whatever. He is still very much in the fight. In fact, just this evening, he slipped away after cocktails to go talk to Lou Dobbs about the state of our world. And as the chairman of the Senate's Military Committee, he is continuing to render unbelievable service. I write a weekly column for the Washington Times, and he usually is lapping me a couple of times in the course of the week, and it's always unbelievably important, thoughtful information about the challenges that we're facing in the country, drawn from the experience of one who served for, I'm tired of guessing the numbers, Admiral, but for a long time in uniform, rising to the rank of a 4-star Admiral and Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet. It was a great honor to have him both in our company and to be able to work with you, sir. And he introduced John Lehman, those of you who were with us when he
My
received
father was
the
20 years
Freedom Flame Award 2 years ago.
I'm like, okay, what do I do with my two
They stole the show. We can't risk having that happen again, especially with the kind of competition that's on the field tonight. I couldn't be more pleased to have, as the person who will formally introduce our guest of honor, another very dear friend, a man who is serving this country in a lot of different ways, including as a member of the Center's Board of Regents, a man who has associations, as we do as an organization, with a number of other organizations, including serving with Miles Prentice and Eddie Zazadeh on the board of the Hudson Institute, some of the folks that we get to work with. Bill Siegel is, like Dick Scaife, a very self-effacing guy. You would never know that he's an enormously successful entrepreneur, that he is a very serious student of history, and has an ability to take the insights from his study of history and translate them in ways that make those insights accessible to the rest of us, including most recently a marvelous book called The Control Factor, Our Struggle to See the True Threat. Now, if you haven't heard of this book, don't feel bad. Because, as I've said to him repeatedly, he is the only author of any book I have ever met who doesn't want anybody to read his book. Go figure. Literally, I think I had him on our radio show for an hour a couple of months back to talk about the book. And he allowed us how that was the first radio interview he'd ever done. And this was about, what, 6 months, a year after the book had come out. It is truly a brilliant analysis of the problem that Michael touched on a moment ago, and I suspect, if I know